All right, so we're looking at the embedded assessment. If you have not already read the situation, please stop the video now and read it. Okay, so you've read the information, and it's the given information right here is that E is the midpoint of DB. Well, here's the answer key over here, and you'll notice that they've marked these two sides right here. That's a mark for congruence, and the reason, or equality, the reason that they've marked them is because E is the midpoint of DB. That means that the midpoint creates two equal pieces on each side. And it also, notice that they've marked this little arrow thingy right here, and that's telling us that AB is parallel to DC. And they gave us that information right here. Okay. So it says prepare a report that indicates whether the cardio equipment and the free weights room will have the same amount of space. So are these two triangles congruent? If they're congruent, then they're going to have the same amount of space. Well, the first thing, we do have a pair of sides. So we know that we've got a pair of sides that are congruent. So now we've got together at least two other pieces of information, because you know from triangles being congruent, you have to have at least three pieces of information in a certain order. This angle right here, this angle is vertical with this angle. And what do we know about vertical angles? We know that they are congruent. So we have a pair of angles. So I'm going to put that right there. So far we have an angle and a side. Now remember, these two lines are parallel, and I'm going to re-sketch them up here, because sometimes when the picture has extra information, it's kind of confusing to see what you're looking for. But what we're working with right now are the top line AB and the bottom line DC, and the only other thing that we have is this transversal right here, the transversal BD. So now that I've redrawn it and that's all you can see, it's a lot easier to see those alternate interior angles. So we've got this pair of angles right here. I'm putting two dots in there to tell you to look at those two. So that's, you can also mark them, of course, with an arc. I'll have to use a double arc right here because I've already used just one arc right there. So the double arcs mean that these two are congruent, but they're not congruent to those. So what do I have? I have another pair of sides, and I'm sorry, I have another pair of angles, and that pair of angles along with this pair of angles are on each side of the side that we know. So that means that we're working with angle side angle. So we've just gone through the thought process that you have to go through in order to prove two triangles congruent. And so with that thought process, you would be able now to write your report. It says mark the diagram. We've done that. Write a congruent statement for the two triangles. Okay, we haven't done that yet. So, well, they've done it right here. The congruent statement is, now you don't have to call it ABE. You don't have to call it ABE. You could have called it BEA. So how you name the first triangle is completely up to you. But once you have that first triangle named, then you must be sure and name the other triangle so that corresponding parts are written in the same order. So angle B right here was congruent to angle D, so you would have to write that first. And then we went down to the vertical angle, so we would have to go DE here, and then we could go to C. So those are the corresponding parts. So did you have to name it this? Well, yes and no. You didn't have to name it ABE, but if you did name it ABE, then you have to name this one CDE. BEA is another way to name it. If you named it BEA, then you have to name it DEC. There should be a couple of other ways you could reverse them. Anyway, I'm not going to list them all. And the reason we've already discussed why these are alternate interior angles, given that we had parallel lines and those are vertical angles, and these are congruent because of definition of midpoint. So I think we've gone through and done everything. We marked the diagrams, we wrote the congruent statement, and we justified it. So they've just written everything that we said out in paragraph form. Okay, number 2 says write a flow chart proof. So it would be the same process. The flow chart is over here. So they start off with the given information, and we had 2 pieces of given information, the parallel lines and the midpoint. From those parallel lines, we got the alternate interior angles congruent. From the definition of a midpoint, we got a statement of congruency about the 2 segments, and that's from definition of a midpoint. And then from the picture, we were able to just look at it and see that the pair of angles are congruent. So here we've made a statement about a pair of angles. Here we've made a statement about a pair of sides. Here's a second statement about a pair of angles. So that's why it's angle, side, angle congruency. Okay, so there's the flow chart proof. And then number 3 says write a 2-column proof showing that E is the midpoint of AC. So in order to just be able to say that E is the midpoint of AC, I need to be able to say that AE is congruent to EC. So that's my goal. And notice that that's the next to the last statement that they have right here. And so as soon as they've made that statement, then they can go ahead and say, oh, that means that E is the midpoint. Because remember, definitions are, I lost my word. Biconditional. So they can go in either order. So you can say that E is the midpoint and then conclude that the 2 pieces are congruent, or you can say the 2 pieces are congruent and then conclude that E is the midpoint. So usually what we do in order to make a statement of congruency is if we're trying to get the congruency, we try to use the 2 triangles that we try to prove 2 triangles that are congruent. So we've already proven that ABE is congruent to CDE. So that proof that we've already done is just written down here. Again, the 2 given statements, well, they did the given and then what they got from the given. They wrote down that it was given that it was parallel, so they wrote down about the alternate interior angles. Okay, they wrote down the given statement that E is the midpoint, and then they wrote down the statement of congruency that they got from that. And it doesn't matter. Does it have to be in this order? Absolutely not. You can I would have put both given pieces of information under statement number 1. Then from the picture, we were able to see that the vertical angles were congruent. So they made that statement. And now in each one of these, this is a statement about angles. This is a statement about sides. This is a statement about angles. We have 3 statements of congruency. We're able to state that the 2 triangles are congruent. And since these 2 triangles are congruent, these 2 pieces are corresponding sides. Notice that AE is the first and last letter, and CE is the first and last letter. That means that they are corresponding parts. So that's what that stands for. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And now that we've made the statement of congruency, we're able to say that E is the midpoint. So same proof, just an extra step at the end. Then problem number 4 wants us to find all of the measures of the angles. So remember, we've already proven that these 2 triangles are congruent. So if angle D down here, which is the middle letter right here, angle D is 32, then that means angle B is going to be 32. That's corresponding parts of congruent triangles. Then I'm going to argue that if this is 32, that this is 32. Why? Because these 2 pieces are congruent. We already know that this piece is equal to this piece. We've just proven right here that E is also the midpoint of AC. So that means that these two pieces right here are congruent. Well, okay, I'll save this one for in a minute. We're gonna prove that it's 32, but we'll have to find this one first. So, yes, these two right here are congruent, but are they congruent to these two? And I say that they are, but I'll go about that a different route. So the other piece of information that they gave me was angle DEC, which is this angle right here, DEC. It says DEC is, so there's where my equal sign goes, is 12 less than, so that means I'm taking 12 away from something, 4 times the measure of EDC, and EDC is 32. So 4 times 32 minus 12 is 116. So this angle right here is 116. Now I'm going to be able to say 116 plus 32. Add those two together, that's 8, 4, 148. Now, that's the sum of two of the angles of the triangle. How many degrees are in a triangle? 180. So take away 148, and what are you left with? 32. So this side over here did end up being 32, which now means that all of these sides are congruent, which is exactly what we knew. If this side is 32, if this angle right here is 32 degrees, that means this angle up here is also 32 degrees. Now, what else do we know about this shape? We know that it is a rectangle. So if it's a rectangle, each one, and it tells us that it's a rectangle right there. So we know that each angle is 90. So if each vertex angle right here is 90, then that means that these right here are complementary angles. So 90 minus 32 is going to be 58. So this angle right here is 58, which means that this angle right here is 58. Why? Because these two sides, this is an isosceles triangle. An isosceles triangle has congruent base angles. I don't even know if y'all know that yet, but that's 58. Now we can find this angle measure, but you could also find it because these are all complementary angles right here. All of these have to be 90 degrees, so they're all 58 for the same reason. So you didn't even have to know that about isosceles triangles. And then this one right here is 116 because vertical angles are congruent. And then what about these two? Well, you can either do 58 plus 58 and subtract it from 180, or you can say that these two right here are supplementary and just say 180 minus 116. And that'll be 4. That'll be 64. Is that right? That'll be 10. Yeah. So this is 64 and this is 64. And I've verbally justified every one of my answers. Of course, you would have to write it down. And you would say 64 because, and you would name these two angles are supplementary. And you would say 58 because these two angles are complementary. These two angles are vertical angles. You would just need to write down the reason besides each calculation. This information right here was given. Okay, so I think we've gone over that one. Thanks for watching.